The Questionthi rain fell soft that morning in Mountain View, a gentle mist over the streets. Sundar Pichai woke before the sun, as he always did. He liked the quiet of those hours before the world began shouting. He liked the silence of his own thoughts before the meetings and decisions and the endless opinions of others filled the air. But that day, something was different. That day, even the silence felt heavy. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at his phone. Message after message. News article after news article. His name everywhere again, this time with anger swirling around it. His inbox full of blame. His face, his voice, his choices, all judged by millions of strangers who thought they knew him. He'd grown used to it, or so he thought. But that morning, the words seemed sharper than usual. He rubbed his eyes. He reminded himself, as he always did, they don't know me. They don't know my story. They don't know what I've seen. And then he heard little footsteps coming down the stairs. His son, Arjun, only 7 years old, padded into the kitchen in his pajamas. His hair was messy, his eyes still sleepy. He held a crumpled piece of paper in one hand, a drawing he'd made of a rocket ship and a stick figure waving from the window. Good morning, Papa, Arjun said softly. Good morning, my boy, Sundar replied, forcing a smile. You're up early. Arjun climbed into the chair across from him, swinging his legs. Then, after a long pause, he said something Sundar didn't expect. Papa, he asked, why do people hate you? Sundar froze. He looked at his son's innocent face, those big brown eyes staring at him with curiosity, not judgment. But the question still cut deep. What do you mean, Arjun? Sundar asked quietly. At school, Arjun said, some kids said you're a bad man. They said you don't care about people. They said you only care about money. They said you make people sad. Is that true? The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the rain outside. Sundar didn't know how to answer, not yet. Arjun waited, and in that waiting, Sundar's mind started to travel backward, into the memories he kept buried, to the streets of Chennai where he grew up, to the tiny house with no running water, where he and his brother slept on the floor, to the days when he stood in line for hours just to make a phone call from a public booth, to the nights he dreamed of becoming someone his parents could be proud of. He remembered his father's hands, calloused from working in a factory, still soft when they touched his shoulder. He remembered his mother's quiet strength when there was no food left, yet she still gave her portion to the boys. He thought about all of it, sitting there at that kitchen table, and he realized something. Maybe it was time to tell Arjun everything. He began, his voice low. There are things about Papa you don't know yet, stories I haven't told you, but maybe it's time you hear them. Arjun nodded slowly, clutching his drawing of the rocket ship. Sundar reached across the table and took his son's small hand in his. People don't hate me because they know me, he said. They hate me because they don't. And with that, he stood up, motioned for Arjun to follow him, and walked to the living room. The morning light spilled through the windows now, and the rain had stopped, but the air still felt thick with what was about to be shared. Sundar sat down on the couch and patted the seat beside him. Arjun climbed up, his eyes wide. I want to tell you where I came from, Sundar said. I want you to understand who I am. And then, maybe, you'll understand why some people are angry, and why that's okay. He took a deep breath, and so the story began. When I was your age, Sundar said, I lived in a very small house. There were 4 of us, your grandfather, your grandmother, your uncle, and me. Our house was so small that when it rained hard, the roof leaked, and the floor got wet. We didn't have a refrigerator. We didn't even have a telephone. Arjun's eyes widened. No telephone. How did you talk to people? We didn't, Sundar said, smiling faintly. Unless we walked to a public booth and waited our turn. And sometimes the line was so long we gave up. He paused, remembering those long afternoons in the sun, waiting and waiting. But even though we had so little, Sundar continued, we were happy. Your grandfather worked very hard to save money for me to go to school. Your grandmother cooked simple meals and taught me to be grateful for what we had. Arjun listened, his little fingers still gripping the rocket drawing. I studied hard because I wanted to give them a better life. Sundar said, I didn't know where it would lead me, but I believed that if I worked enough, if I stayed kind, if I didn't give up one day, I could make a difference. He smiled at his son. And I think I have, he said. But then his smile faded. He said softly, when you grow up and people see you succeed, some of them will cheer for you, and some of them won't. Arjun frowned. But why, Papa? Why wouldn't they be happy for you? Sundar sighed, looking out the window. Because he said, sometimes people see your success as a reminder of what they don't have. Sometimes they think it's unfair that you got something they didn't, and sometimes they don't understand how much you gave up to get there. The boy stayed quiet, trying to understand. Then Sundar's phone buzzed again on the table. Another message. Another headline. Arjun reached for the phone before Sundar could stop him. He read the words out loud. Pichai accused of putting profits over people. Arjun's voice trembled slightly. Is that true, Papa? Sundar didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to his desk, and picked up a faded photo frame. In the photo, his father was standing next to a young Sundar at his college graduation. Both of them were smiling, both of them looking proud. He handed the photo to Arjun. "Do you know what your grandfather told me that day?" Sundar asked. Arjun shook his head. He said, "Never forget where you came from, and never let anyone make you smaller just because they don't understand you." He put his hand gently on Arjun's shoulder. "So no," he said firmly, "I don't put profits over people. But the world is big, and people only see a piece of you. They don't see the long nights. They don't see the tears. They don't see the quiet choices you make to help others when no one is watching." Arjun stared down at the photo. Sundar continued, "One day, you'll have to choose between what is easy and what is right," he said. "And when you choose what is right, some people won't like it. But you must choose it anyway." The boy looked up at his father with wide eyes. "But how do you know what is right?" Sundar smiled faintly. "You listen to your heart," he said. "You remember the boy you once were. The boy who stood in the rain waiting for his turn at the phone booth. The boy who dreamed of rockets and stars. That boy will tell you what is right." There was a silence then. Arjun climbed into his father's lap, laying his head on his chest. Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly against the glass. And in that quiet moment, Sundar thought of all the battles still ahead, all the voices he would still have to face. But somehow, holding his son, he felt ready. He closed his eyes, but just as he did, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. A new message, a new headline. But this one was different. "Whistleblower claims Pichai hid. Dangerous truth about AI project." His hands went cold. His chest tightened. Arjun looked up at him, confused. "What is it, Papa?" Sundar's lips parted, but no words came. Because this time, even he didn't know what to say. The room seemed to shrink. The air grew heavy again. He stared at the screen, the words blurring. And in the quiet, only one thought filled his mind. This was just the beginning. Asterisk, the whistleblower's words on the phone screen refused to go away. Sundar sat frozen on the couch, his hand still gripping the phone, as if it could somehow change what he saw. Arjun leaned against him, still waiting for an explanation. But Sundar's lips felt too heavy to move. "Whistleblower claims Pichai hid. Dangerous truth about AI project." Outside, the rain picked up again, rattling the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared. But inside the living room, there was only silence and the quiet thump of Sundar's heart in his chest. He didn't want Arjun to see him this way, quiet, unsettled, unsure. He had spent years building a calm surface, never letting the world see what storms raged beneath it. He had mastered the art of stillness, of measured words, of staying graceful, even when the ground beneath him shook. But that headline felt like a crack in the glass. Arjun's voice finally broke through. It was small and hesitant. "Papa, what does that mean? What's a whistleblower?" Sundar forced himself to take a deep breath. He looked down at his son and managed the faintest of smiles. Though his stomach churned, "A whistleblower," he said slowly, "is someone who believes that something wrong has happened, and they decide to tell the world about it." Arjun frowned, confused. "So, did you do something wrong?" Sundar set the phone down on the table, face down this time, as though that could keep the accusation contained. He placed both hands over his face for a moment, then let them fall into his lap. He didn't answer right away, because the truth was more complicated than a yes or no. His mind was already racing through the past few months. Meetings behind closed doors, long memos filled with warnings. Engineers arguing late into the night about risks and deadlines. And his own voice, steady and firm, reminding them all, "We cannot stop progress, but we can guide it." Had he ignored something? Had he silenced someone? He didn't think so. But doubts had a way of creeping in when you least expected them. He looked at Arjun again, at those innocent eyes waiting for honesty. "Sometimes," Sundar said finally, "even when you try your best to do what's right, people see it differently. Sometimes they believe you've hurt them, even when you meant to help." Arjun nodded slowly, though his brow stayed furrowed. "But, did you hurt someone?" The question settled over Sundar like a weight. He leaned back on the couch and let his thoughts drift to Chennai again, the crowded streets where he grew up, the little room where he first fell in love with technology. He remembered his first encounter with a computer, how it felt like touching the future itself. He remembered how he promised himself, all those years ago, that he would bring that future to everyone, not just to the few who could afford it. He thought about the engineers, who had cried in his office when they told him about their fears. He thought about the boardroom debates over safety and innovation. He thought about his own decision to push ahead, believing they would find solutions before harm could happen. And now this. "Papa," Arjun whispered again, his voice trembling. "Now, did you?" Sundar exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. "I don't know yet," he admitted, his voice breaking just a little. "But I promise you this, Arjun, if I did, I will make it right." He pulled his son close and held him, feeling the boy's small heartbeat against his chest. Just then, his phone buzzed again. Another message. He didn't want to look, but he knew he had to. He picked it up and read the new notification. "Soon, we need to talk. The story's spreading fast. Come to the office. Now. It was from one of his closest advisors. He rose to his feet, still holding the phone in his hand. The calmness he tried to wear, as armor was slipping. His jaw tightened as he turned toward the stairs. Arjun stood on the couch now, watching him. Where are you going? He asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. To work, Sundar said, forcing his tone to be gentle. But I'll be back soon. Arjun held up his drawing of the rocket ship and waved it. Don't forget your promise, he said. Sundar stopped in the doorway and turned back, feeling his throat tighten. I won't, he said softly. I never do. The ride to the office was quiet and gray. The streets blurred past the windows of the car. The rain had turned to a drizzle now, but the sky stayed heavy and low. Sundar stared out at the city he'd helped shape, the glass towers, the humming data centers, the endless lines of cars and people, all running on the technology he'd helped create. And yet, in that moment, it all felt fragile. When he arrived at the office, the atmosphere inside was tense. People moved quickly through the hallways, whispering to each other, avoiding his gaze. It reminded him of the first time he walked into this building years ago. But everything was different now. Back then, they looked at him with hope. Now, it was something else. He stepped into the conference room where his advisors were waiting. Their faces were grave. One of them, a woman named Lena, stood and spoke first. The whistleblower's statement is public now, she said, sliding a printed copy across the table. They're claiming you ignored internal warnings about the AI project. They say you buried a report that predicted serious harm. Sundar picked up the paper and scanned it. The words stung more than he expected. Leadership prioritized deadlines and profits over ethical considerations. Warnings about potential misuse and bias were downplayed or ignored. Senior leadership, including Mr. Pichai, signed off on moving forward, despite knowing the risks. He set the paper down and took a long breath. Lena continued, her voice steady, but edged with worry. The press is running with it. We've got journalists camping outside already. Regulators are asking questions. Another advisor chimed in, his voice sharper. You need to make a statement, Sundar, today. If you don't, people will assume you're guilty. But Sundar didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at his hands resting on the table. He thought of all the people who had trusted him. He thought of his father's words. Never let anyone make you smaller, just because they don't understand you. He finally looked up. His eyes were calm, but inside, a storm was building. Before I speak, he said quietly, I want to see the full report, the real one, not what the press is saying, not what someone else claims. I want the truth. The room went silent. Lena nodded slowly. We'll get it for you. As he left the room, he could feel all their eyes on his back. Walking down the hallway, he thought again of Arjun's question that morning. Why do people hate you, Papa? And he wondered if this was the answer. By the time he reached his office, the rain had stopped, but the clouds remained. He sat at his desk and stared out the window at the city below. He thought about the boy who stood in line at the phone booth in Chennai. He thought about the dream that boy had to build something that would help everyone reach higher. Dream bigger. He wondered if somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that boy. Just then, Lena walked in, carrying a thick folder. Found the report, she said, placing it on his desk. He opened it and began to read. The words inside made his stomach turn. The warnings were clear. The risks were spelled out in plain language. And at the bottom, in his own handwriting, was his signature. He remembered that day now, the pressure from investors. The insistence that they couldn't afford to fall behind competitors. The way everyone in the room had looked to him for the final word. He remembered telling himself that they could fix the problems later. He remembered believing that the good would outweigh the bad. And now, here it was. Staring back at him, Arjun's voice echoed in his mind again. But did you hurt someone? He didn't know how to answer. The sky outside darkened as he sat there. The report still opened before him, and then his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a video. He pressed play. The screen filled with the face of a young engineer, someone he remembered from months ago. Someone who had cried in his office. She was speaking directly to the camera. Her voice shaky but strong. I tried to tell them, she said. I tried to warn them. But they didn't listen. He didn't listen. Sundar's chest tightened. She continued. If anyone gets hurt, it's on him. The video ended. The screen went black. Sundar set the phone down slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like stones. Outside, lightning split the sky, and the first rumble of thunder rolled through the city. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, feeling the storm both inside and out. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he could say he'd done the right thing. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. What if the boy he used to be, the boy who believed in rockets and stars and kindness, wouldn't even recognize the man he had become? The office door creaked open behind him, and Lena's voice broke the silence. There's more, she said. You need to see this. Sundar turned slowly, his face pale. What is it? He asked. She handed him another piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly. They're not just accusing you of ignoring the warnings, she said. They're accusing you of covering them up. Sundar stared at the paper. The words blurred, but one sentence stood out, sharp and unforgiving. Evidence suggests Mr. Pichai ordered documents destroyed to protect the company's reputation. The room felt suddenly colder. His throat went dry. His fingers tightened. Around the paper, Arjun's voice came back to him again. Did you hurt someone, Papa? He didn't know how much longer he could say no. And as the thunder cracked outside and the rain poured down again, Sundar realized something. The storm was only just beginning. The stormed paper in his hand felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Sundar sat motionless in his office chair, staring at the sentence that seemed to glow on the page like fire. Evidence suggests Mr. Pichai ordered documents destroyed to protect the company's reputation. He read it again and again, as if the words would change if he stared long enough. But they didn't. They only dug deeper, carving themselves into his chest. Outside his window, the rain was no longer just falling. It was pounding the glass in thick sheets. The thunder grew louder now, shaking the walls. In the distance, sirens wailed. The whole world seemed to echo what he felt inside. Chaos, fear, a storm he couldn't control. Lena was still standing by the door, watching him carefully. Her hands were clasped together, her knuckles white. We don't know if this is true, she said softly, almost pleadingly. It could just be noise. Someone trying to hurt you. We'll figure it out. But Sundar barely heard her. His mind was spinning back through time, searching for the moment when this all began. And as he sat there, flashes of memory began to surface, sharp, uninvited. He remembered the meeting in that same office months ago. A room full of advisors, lawyers, engineers, all of them talking at once, their voices rising and clashing, like waves. The engineer, her name was Maya. He remembered now, standing in the corner, clutching a folder to her chest, her face pale but determined. She had tried to speak, she had tried to tell them something, but he had cut her off. He could still hear his own voice, calm but final. We don't have time for this right now. We can revisit later, but later never came. He set the paper down and rubbed his eyes. When he opened them again, Lena was still there, waiting. He met her gaze finally, and spoke, his voice low but steady. I need to talk to Maya. Lena hesitated. We don't know where she is. She left the company 2 weeks ago. That struck him like a blow. 2 weeks ago, he repeated. And no one told me. Lena shook her head, her eyes dropping to the floor. She didn't want to speak to anyone. She just walked away. Sundar stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Find her, he said. I don't care what it takes. I need to talk to her. Lena nodded and hurried out, leaving him alone again. He turned back to the window and watched the city through the rain. The streets below glistened like wet glass, and tiny figures moved under umbrellas, hurrying through their lives, unaware of the storm inside this office. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider in his own world, like he was back in Chennai again, a boy standing on the edges of things, watching other people belong. He thought about Arjun, waiting at home with his rocket drawing. Don't forget your promise, his son had said. And now, Sundar wondered if he even knew what that promise meant anymore. Just then, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Lena. It was a message from an unknown number. He hesitated, then opened. There was no text. Just a single attachment, a blurry photo of a shredded document, pieces scattered across a table, and a short voice message that played automatically. You think you can hide forever. You can't. The truth always comes out. His stomach turned cold. He played the message again, listening to the voice low, distorted, unrecognizable. But the words were clear enough, and so was the threat. He sat down heavily, gripping the edge of the desk to steady himself. He tried to remember everything about that day when the decision was made to move forward with the AI project. Who was there? What was said? He remembered the pressure from the board, the investors warning him that if they didn't act, competitors would overtake them. He remembered telling himself he was protecting the company, protecting everyone's jobs. But now, it all felt like excuses. He stood suddenly, unable to sit still any longer. He walked down the hallway to the archives room, a quiet space filled with boxes of old files and digital records. He waved away the assistant who offered to help and closed the door behind him. The room smelled faintly of dust and paper. The lights above hummed softly. He began searching through the shelves, pulling out boxes, scanning labels, looking for anything with Maya's name on it. He needed to know what she had been trying to tell him. He needed to see it with his own eyes. After nearly an hour, he found a thin folder tucked in the back of a drawer, her handwriting on the tab. He opened it carefully and began to read. The first page was a memo, written months earlier, titled Unaddressed Risks of Accelerated Deployment. It listed potential harms, discrimination, misuse, misinformation, all spelled out clearly. And at the bottom, her final note, recommend immediate pause and independent audit before further rollout. He closed the folder and leaned against the wall, his chest tight. The storm outside seemed to rage louder now, lightning flashing through. the windows, thunder rolling like an angry drum. He sank to the floor, resting his head in his hands. How had he missed this? How had he let it happen? And the thought struck him suddenly. Had someone else buried her report without telling him? Could he have signed off on something without understanding the full weight of it? The door creaked open behind him. He turned, expecting Lena, but it wasn't Lena. It was Rajesh, one of his oldest colleagues. Someone who had been with him since his early days at the company. Rajesh stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Rajesh said quietly. Sundar nodded and got to his feet. They walked back to his office in silence. When they arrived, Rajesh closed the door behind them and sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rajesh leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're not crazy," he said finally. "You didn't imagine it. Someone did bury her report." Sundar froze. Rajesh looked down at his hands. "I can't prove it yet, but there are only a few people who had access to the internal systems. I think they were trying to protect you." Sundar's jaw tightened. "Protect me from what?" "The truth." Rajesh met his eyes, and for the first time, Sundar saw something there. "Fear. From yourself," Rajesh said. The words hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back in his chair, the air suddenly feeling thin. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Rajesh hesitated, then said, "You've been carrying this company on your back for years. You've made impossible decisions, held everyone else's weight, but somewhere along the way, they stopped telling you everything, because they didn't want you to break." Sundar closed his eyes, feeling the storm surge inside him again. He thought of Arjun's question, echoing louder than ever now. "Why do people hate you, Papa?" Maybe because they didn't know him, or maybe because he didn't know himself anymore. The office phone rang suddenly, making both men jump. Sundar reached for it and answered. It was Lena. Her voice was rushed, urgent. "We found Maya," she said. "She's agreed to meet with you." Sundar straightened in his chair. "Where?" "She is waiting at a cafe downtown," Lena said. "She wants to talk before she decides what to do next." He hung up without another word, grabbed his coat, and walked to the elevator. Rajesh followed silently. The drive downtown was quiet except for the rain, which had slowed now to a soft drizzle. Sundar stared out the window, watching the city lights blur and flicker. When they arrived, he stepped out into the wet street, his shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The cafe was small, tucked between two larger buildings, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. He pushed open the door and stepped in, and there she was, sitting at a corner table. Her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes tired, but steady. Maya looked up as he approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sundar sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." He shook his head. "I should have listened to you sooner." She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Do you even know what you signed that day?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I thought I did," he admitted, "but maybe I didn't." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table to him. "This," she said, "is everything they didn't want you to see." He picked it up, feeling its small weight in his palm. "Why are you giving this to me now?" he asked. Her gaze softened just slightly. "Because," she said, "I don't want to hate you." And with that, she stood and walked out into the rain, leaving him sitting there alone. Sundar stared at the flash drive, his reflection faint in the metal surface. Outside the window, the clouds were breaking, thin streaks of light beginning to pierce through, but inside, the storm was far from over. He slipped the drive into his pocket, stood, and walked back out into the night, the quiet promise in his heart still alive somehow, even under the weight of everything else. But as he climbed back into the car, his phone buzzed one more time, a single text from another unknown number. "You're too late. It's already begun." His chest tightened. He looked out at the city lights, his hands gripping the flash drive, and he wondered, what had he just stepped into? And could he ever find his way out again? The flash-driven car ride home felt longer than it should have. The flash drive weighed heavy in Sundar's pocket, as though it were a stone pulling him deeper into dark water. Outside the window, the rain had stopped at last, but the street still glistened with puddles reflecting the harsh glow of streetlights. People hurried by on the sidewalks, their faces turned away, each of them chasing something: warmth, safety, an end to the day. But Sundar sat still in the back seat, staring at nothing. One hand curled tightly around the flash drive. The words from the last text message wouldn't leave his mind. "You're too late. It's already begun." He wondered what it meant. What had already begun? He reached into his pocket and ran his thumb over the small device. It was strange to think that something so small could hold the answers, and yet, possibly, also his undoing. The car pulled up to his house, and the driver glanced back at him briefly before opening the door. Sundar stepped out, his shoes crunching softly on the wet gravel. The house was quiet, dark except for a single light in the living room window. Inside, he found Arjun curled up on the couch, asleep under a thin blanket. The boy's small hand still clutched the crumpled rocket drawing, now smudged with faint fingerprints. Sundar stood there for a long moment, watching him sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. Something in his chest tightened, and he felt the edges of guilt creep into him, sharp, cold. He leaned down, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from Arjun's forehead. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he meant for being late, or for something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. He straightened and carried the flash drive into his study, closing the door softly behind him. Study was quiet, lined with bookshelves and faintly smelling of paper and wood polish. He sat down at his desk, plugged the drive into his laptop, and waited. For a moment. Nothing happened. Then a folder appeared on the screen. Inside it were dozens of files, documents, audio recordings, internal emails, meeting notes, all carefully organized. At the very top was a file titled simply, "For You." He clicked it. A video began to play. Maya appeared on the screen, sitting in a dim room. She looked tired, her eyes dark, her voice low but clear. "If you're watching this," she said, "then you've finally decided to see the truth. I hope it's not too late." She glanced down at something in her hands, then back at the camera. "You signed off on the AI deployment without knowing everything." She continued. "I tried to tell you. Others did too. But someone in your circle didn't want you to hear it. They removed our reports from the official record. They silenced us. And they moved ahead, knowing what the system was capable of and what it would do to people." Sundar leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding harder now. "This isn't just about bias or misinformation," Maya said. "It's worse than that. They trained the system on data it should never have seen, private data, medical data, conversations scraped without consent. They rushed it into the world before safeguards were in place, and now it's being used in ways we can't control." She paused, and for the first time, her voice cracked slightly. "People are already getting hurt," she said softly, "and if you don't stop it, more will." The screen went black. Sundar sat back in his chair, staring at the dark screen, his hands trembling slightly. He felt as though the walls of the study were closing in around him. Outside the window, the wind picked up, rattling the glass faintly. He opened the other files one by one, emails between engineers, their pleas growing more desperate over time. Audio clips of meetings where voices shouted over one another, warnings ignored. Spreadsheets full of names, data, predictions of harm. And at the bottom of one document, a single line written in bold: "Destroy, if discovered." He stared at that line. For a long time, his chest tight, his mind numb. There it was, the proof. Someone had deliberately hidden this from him, someone close, and whoever it was, they had done it in his name. He closed the laptop and sat in silence, his hands resting in his lap. The quiet was broken by a soft knock at the study door. "Papa." Arjun's voice was muffled through the wood. Sundar stood quickly, crossing the room and opening the door. Arjun stood there, still holding his rocket drawing, his eyes sleepy but worried. "Why are you still awake?" Sundar asked gently. "I couldn't sleep," Arjun said, his voice small. "Are you okay?" Sundar crouched down so he was at eye level with his son. For a moment he didn't know what to say. The truth felt too heavy to speak aloud. But he forced a faint smile. "Anyway, I will be," he said softly. Arjun studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "You promised," he said simply. "I know," Sundar replied, "and I keep my promises." He walked Arjun back to bed and sat with him until his eyes finally closed. Then he returned to the study and picked up his phone. He dialed Lena. Answered immediately. "Sundar, get me a full list of everyone who had access to the project's data at the senior level," he said quietly. "And Lena, don't tell anyone else, I'm asking." There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Yes, I understand." He hung up and sat back, staring at the laptop again. The flash drive still glowed faintly in the dark. He thought of Maya's face in the video, the weight in her eyes, the quiet accusation in her voice. "You didn't know. But you should have." He thought of Arjun's question again. "Why do people hate you, Papa?" And for the first time, he wondered if the answer was because he had been too willing to believe that good intentions were enough. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was another text. From the same unknown number. "You really think you can fix this?" He stared at the words. Then another message arrived, almost instantly. "Check your email." He opened his inbox. At the top was a single new message. No subject line, no sender name. He clicked it. Inside was a single photograph, a blurry shot, of him, taken earlier that evening, leaving the cafe. Behind him, in the shadows, a figure stood watching. And below the photo, just two words: "Too late." His blood ran cold. He closed the email and sat back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing down on him. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just trying to discredit him anymore. They were watching him, following him, and they were daring him to move. He stared out the window at the quiet street below, the city lights stretching far into the distance, and slowly, a resolve began to form in him, heavy, deliberate, unshakable. He would not run from this. He would not let someone else write the story of his life. He opened the laptop again and began to type, drafting a statement to the board, to the company, to the public. Every word he wrote felt like a stone being laid into place, the foundation of something harder, stronger than before. And yet, beneath it all, a single question kept whispering through his mind. No matter how he tried to ignore it, who betrayed me? He didn't have the answer yet, but he would find it, even if it meant losing everything. The betrayed sun never really rose the next morning. It hid behind heavy clouds that loomed low and gray, leaving the sky dull and lifeless. Sundar sat at the edge of his bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring down at the flash drive on the nightstand. He hadn't slept. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, the same questions came back, sharper and heavier each time. Who betrayed me? How close were they, and why? He could hear Arjun in the next room, humming softly to himself as he colored. Even that innocent sound felt weighted now, a reminder that this wasn't just about him. Every choice he made would ripple outward, touching everyone he loved, and yet, he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was finally beginning to see how deep the cracks ran. He stood, washed his face with cold water, and dressed quietly. The house was still when he left, the air outside, damp and sharp, with the smell of wet concrete. His driver waited at the curb but didn't say a word, sensing the gravity that hung around him like a storm cloud. The ride to the office was quiet. Outside the car window, the city moved as it always did, fast, indifferent. Alive, but to Sundar, it felt distant, like watching a world he no longer belonged to. Every face on the street seemed to blur into the next. And yet somewhere among those faces was the person who had chosen to betray him. The thought gnawed at him, bitter and cold. When he arrived, the lobby was unusually quiet. People glanced up as he walked in, then quickly looked away. Whispers followed him down the hallway. They all knew something now, or thought they did. Lena was waiting in his office. She stood as he entered, holding a thin folder in her hands. Her expression was tight, her shoulders stiff. You asked for the list, she said quietly. He took the folder from her and opened it. 5 names, 5 people with full access to the internal data. 5 people who could have buried Maya's report and orchestrated everything behind his back. At the top of the list was a name he expected, Rajesh. He stared at it for a long time. Lena spoke again, her voice low. I know he's been with you a long time, but the timeline fits, and there are emails. She handed him another sheet of paper, a printed email chain between Rajesh and one of the project managers. The language was careful but clear enough. We cannot let this memo reach the board. We'll handle it internally. Trust me. Signed, Rajesh. Sundar set the paper down slowly. His chest felt tight, like a fist was closing around his ribs. He thought of all the years they'd worked side by side. The late nights in empty offices. The quiet jokes shared before big meetings. The way Rajesh had always stood just behind him, steady and loyal, or so he thought. He closed the folder and looked at Lena. Where is he now? Conference room 2, she said. He's waiting for you. Sundar nodded, though every step he took toward that room felt heavier than the last. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Rajesh sat alone at the long table, a cup of coffee in front of him, his hands folded neatly. He looked up as Sundar entered, and for the first time in all their years together, there was no warmth in his eyes, only something colder, harder to name. You wanted to see me, Rajesh said, his tone measured. Sundar closed the door behind him and sat down across from him. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid the printed emails across the table. Rajesh glanced down at them, then back up at Sundar. His expression didn't change. You knew, Sundar said quietly. You knew what the system was capable of. You knew what it was doing to people. And you hid it from me. Rajesh took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. I did what I had to do, he said evenly. To protect you. To protect all of us. Protect me. Sundar's voice rose just slightly, a crack of disbelief in it. By making me a liar. By letting me stand in front of the world and claim we were doing no harm while you buried the evidence. Rajesh leaned back in his chair, his hands still folded. You wouldn't have been able to make the hard choice, he said. You would have frozen. You would have let the whole company collapse because you were too afraid of looking like the bad guy. I did what you couldn't, and you're welcome. The words landed like a slap. Sundar stared at him, feeling a heat rise in his chest. Anger, yes, but something else too. Sadness, disappointment so deep it almost felt like grief. You don't get to decide what I can or can't do, Sundar said, his voice low but sharp. You don't get to take away my choice and call it protection. Rajesh shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, but it was bitter, humorless.